Good morning. How was your Christmas? It's such a special time of year where we get to celebrate Jesus coming down to be with us from heaven. He came to save us, but what did he come to save us from? When Adam and Eve were created, they had everything that they needed. All their needs were met by God. Adam had a purpose to rule over the animals. Everything was provided for. They knew they belonged to God. In Genesis chapter 1, verses 26 and 27, it tells us that God created humans in his own image. So we get an idea of what God looks like by looking at humans. Very cool. And therefore, Adam and Eve had a spiritual connection with God. But when Adam and Eve were tricked by the devil into eating the fruit, what the Bible calls sin, they lost that connection with God. For the first time, they began to have negative emotions, feeling fearful and depressed and rejected. It tells us that in Genesis chapter 3 verse 10. So God sent Jesus to undo the work that the devil had done when he tricked Adam and Eve. God sent Jesus to bring us life and restore that connection with God. He came to give us life and life to the full. How do you think Adam and Eve felt before they ate the fruit? Probably pretty content. And what about afterwards? What had changed? Well, this tells us that they were suddenly scared and confused. They knew all sorts of bad things, bad thoughts and feelings that they had never felt before they ate the fruit. I don't know about you, but I love mint sweets. I've got one here. I'll hold it really close to the camera. Inside every one of us is a God-shaped hole in our hearts, a bit like this mint. You can see my hand waving behind it. This is how we were created, with a hole in the middle. You know, I was just saying about Adam and Eve. Sin separates us from God. So how do we fill that God-shaped hole? A famous mathematician once said there's a God-shaped hole in all of us and nothing created can ever fill it. It can only be filled by God. Without Jesus, we're empty. But when we ask Jesus into our hearts, he fills this hole with his spirit. We're no longer separated from God, and we can have that connection with God. It's really easy. We just have to ask. Over the next few weeks, we're going to hear a new story to help us understand why it's good to be friends with Jesus and how he makes our lives better. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to The Adventures of Lilly Pepper, Chapter 1, Trouble at School. Lilly Pepper was 7 years old. She lived with her mum and her baby brother Jake and a very scruffy dog called Mop. A strange name, but that's what Lilly wanted to call him when she was just 2. So her mum had agreed. That was the other thing about Lilly Pepper. She was very determined. In fact, her second name wasn't really Pepper at all. She'd been called that once by Mum because she liked eating raw peppers, green, yellow, red. She liked them all. And now she refused to be called anything else. In the first weeks of any new school year, when her real name was called on the school register, she would stand up, put her hands on her hips and proclaim, "Mr. Edwards, my name is Lilly Pepper." After she did that a few times, Mr. Edwards, like every teacher before him, gave in. Anything for a peaceful life. But deep down, Mr. Edwards knew this class was not going to give him a peaceful life. They were approaching the summer holidays, and every morning for the whole year, with a sigh, Mr. Edwards had called, "Lilly Pepper," and Lilly would stand, smile and announce, "Here I am, Mr. Edwards, ready for action." Lilly was definitely lively. That was the word Mr. Edwards used at parents' evening in describing Lilly to her mum. But in the staff room, he simply rolled his eyes and said, "She's wild." She wasn't wild. She simply liked to think for herself, and she didn't do things just because everybody else did. And she wasn't that keen on believing everything Mr. Edwards showed on the whiteboard, unless he could prove it. And that's why today, Lilly found herself standing outside the head teacher's office, waiting to explain what she'd done in class. It had started when Mr. Edwards had shown the class a picture of a tadpole on the whiteboard, a tiny, wriggly tadpole, and told the children that this is how all life once began. And then the next picture showed the tadpole with legs. And then it got bigger and bigger. And by the end of the pictures, it had changed into a monkey. Then more pictures of monkeys changing to eventually look like people. Mr. Edwards concluded his talk with the words, "And that's where all people come from." Now let's write that down in our books. But Lily burst out laughing. She was laughing so loud it was hard to hear anything else. And then she said it, the line that was going to get her sent straight to the head teacher's office. "I don't think that's right, Mr. Edwards. We do look a bit like monkeys, but that shouldn't make us think we come from them. God made you, Mr. Edwards, just like he made everyone." Well, Mr. Edwards didn't know what to do. Lily was still laughing because she found the whole thing so ridiculous. The other children were now making monkey noises. Mr. Edwards was getting more and more cross, desperately trying to explain that we all came from monkeys. And with Lilly Pepper's echoes still giggling in his head, he got far too angry and shouted at the top of his voice, "You're all monkeys!" The class stopped and stared. But Lilly Pepper called back, "No, we're not. We're children. God made us children, not monkeys." And that was the last straw. Lily was sent to see Mrs. Stevens, the head teacher, to explain her actions. What will Mrs. Stevens do? We'll find out next time. So we left that story not quite knowing what's going on, what's true, what's not. But for this week, let's think about what God says is true. What's true is you are special because God says His Holy Spirit lives inside you. He has made you to do good things. You can always come to God and talk with Him. You can do things you find hard because God gives you strength and helps you. You are safe because God says you're not guilty or bad because God has forgiven you. Nothing can come between God and you. He will finish the good work He started in you. You are safe with Jesus and in God. You are a child of God and you are safe from evil. And finally, you are accepted because God says you are His child. Jesus chose you to be His friend. You are a saint, a special person set aside by God. And you've been forgiven for all the things you've done wrong. Don't forget to have a look on the church website if you want to download colouring pages and activities to help you remember this. Have a lovely week and I'll see you next time.